Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome aboard. We are here for generative AI to support rubric design and use. I do see it's 7 o'clock on my end, so I am going to go ahead and move forward with our webinar tonight. If others join us, they can certainly catch up as well. And as you heard, we are recording for later viewing for those who missed tonight as well. But thank you for coming tonight and getting into this topic that I absolutely love to discuss. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and move forward. As we begin our session, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which I live and work, which is Chattanooga, Tennessee. This land is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Cherokee Nation, specifically the Cherokee people who were forcibly removed from this region during the Trail of Tears. We honor their resilience, strength, and enduring connection of Indigenous peoples to this land, past, present, and future. Also, if you feel comfortable, feel free to share in the chat where you're joining us from today so we can all recognize and honor the diverse lands that bring us together in this space tonight. My name is Eric White, and I am a consultant for Advanced Learning Partnerships, and we're happy to bring this to you in partnership with OECM. Before I became a consultant with Advanced Learning Partnership, I was a teacher and instructional coach as well. And in relation to generative AI, I will say back in December 2022, when ChatGPT first came on the scene, it became this sort of watershed moment for me. I got really excited about the possibilities and what the implications are for teaching and learning. And so I'm a learner like the rest of us. Things are moving at a breakneck speed sometimes with AI, and sometimes it's even hard to keep up with all those developments. But it's something that has really triggered some excitement with me, and I'm certainly happy to be here tonight to share a little bit about that excitement and give you some things to use that I hope are practical and useful in your own setting as well. As we're getting settled in, if you don't mind, feel free in the chat to introduce yourself and maybe even respond to the following prompt. When you think about AI, what's one area of your work you hope it can improve? I'll pause to see if anyone wants to share, and we will move forward in just a quick moment. All right, I am going to move forward, but as those of you who are thinking on that prompt and writing on that prompt, feel free to drop that in the chat. Sid, I see your response. Thank you so much. It's always nice to know how you're kind of entering into this space of AI and what you see are some of the hopes that you have as well. So again, feel free to use that chat as a bit of a back channel to connect as we're going through tonight's webinar as well. All right. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take a few steps forward. I do want to frame our session, and I want to begin first, though, by just doing a very quick review on some of our previous sessions. This is the third and final installment of this generative AI series on assessment. Our first session together about a month ago, we looked at formative assessments, and we really looked at how we could leverage practical prompt strategies to make that happen as well. Then in session two, we moved into the summative side of things. started to use different prompts to help us think about different form of assessments that can engage with our students and increase learning. And with our final installment tonight, we are going to look at rubrics and how we can streamline and strengthen rubric creation and application in our teaching practice. And we are going to cover a few strategies that really help us develop clear, concise, and fair rubrics for our students as well. Some of you may even be encouraged to bring with you a little bit later in this webinar a piece of curriculum or even a former rubric that you might want to use a little bit later. And I'll explain that once we get there. But lots of options you're going to have tonight as we get into some prompting and interaction with some of our generative AI platforms. So, with that being said, just a couple of things to expect from tonight. We encourage that active participation primarily. You'll see that going on in the chat. Maureen, I see your message as well. Thank you. Having that dialogue, that open dialogue on the chat can really bring out those connections while we're learning together. And this is a space to be collaborative. So again, in the chat, I hope you'll share innovative practices, resources, ideas as well. I do think the collective wisdom of all of us will increase our learning tonight in the webinar. So with that being said, a couple of outcomes that will also frame tonight's session. So number one, we're just going to understand some of the basics of generative AI, including education use cases and some of the associated risk and responsibilities that come with that as well. For those of you who may have attended previous sessions, we kind of set the foundation during the first half of the webinar, and then we start to really dig in to a specific area, which of course tonight is rubric design and use, which leads us to our second outcome. We're going to leverage generative AI to streamline and strengthen rubric creation and application. So that's sort of the two major goals that I hope we can achieve tonight. Let's take a quick look at the agenda as well. So as we go through tonight's session, and this hour will go by quickly, so I'm going to be a good steward of our time. But first, we're going to start off with just a basic introduction to generative AI to make sure we're all operating off a common knowledge base. We're going to do a little bit of an introduction to prompt engineering. If you've been to previous sessions, we've looked at a few different prompt strategies that we can use. We're also going to move into the intersection of generative AI and rubric design and use. That'll be the third stage or section of this agenda. And then my favorite part four, is the prompt challenge. I always want to make sure that I provide some sample prompts that you can use and take with you after today's session. But during session, we're going to have some time to actually apply some of those. So look forward to that. And of course, we'll have a closing reflection to wrap things up as well. And just on the norms and etiquette piece, just encourage you to be present for the learning, to try things out. Of course, we can kind of tinker around with AI and learn and iterate with it, which I love. Share your ideas. And just for a tech etiquette piece, I'm just going to ask that you mute your microphone when not actively speaking. There may be a time where you want to unmute and share an idea, and that's certainly fine. But just to reduce any background noise, I'm just going to ask you to stay muted, which you are right now when not actively speaking. We're about to jump in to our first section of the agenda, but one quick disclaimer. The tools used in this webinar may or may not be approved for use by your local Board of Education, but are used to demonstrate broad principles and techniques transferable to many other approved platforms and applications. So please do check with your local board to determine if these tools are indeed approved for use. Oh, and I saw your contribution in the chat as well, Deborah. Thank you so much. All right, so let's go ahead and dig in with an introduction to generative AI. I want to start off because context is awfully important to me, and it helps me kind of frame the speed and depth of which our webinars may progress. So I'm going to ask you to jump into the chat one more time for me, and I'm just going to ask you to just figure out where you're starting from with AI. Which ranking would you give yourself? A one, two, three, or four based on what you see there? Also, if you don't mind, let me know if this is your first live session with me or if you've attended any of my previous sessions. So you could give me the number that you're rating yourself at, and you could say, new, as in tonight's my first webinar actively live, or you could say repeat, meaning you've been here before, you've heard some of this, and you're back for more. Sid, welcome. You're a newbie. Well, that's wonderful. Glad to have you for our third installment. Okay, Maureen, you gave yourself a three. Absolutely. Very good, Deborah. Thank you so much. A lot of expertise on your end, and I appreciate you sharing your background with this as well. And yes, 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 we have the recordings, of course, that you can use from these webinars. And I also will be sending a follow-up email after tonight's session. It may be a day or two. I need to make sure that the recording goes through, but I will also be sending tonight's slide deck as well, just in case those are useful for you as a reference tool. So do know that. Very good. Thanks again. It's always nice to know some of these things. So we have a mix of newbies and those of you who have a little bit more of a deeper approach to this as well. So I want to try to hit the sweet spot with this. I want to get to the actual interactive piece as soon as we can, but I don't want to miss out on some key points that I think will level set the room together. So if you'll indulge me, I just have a few quick slides that will give us a little bit of a grounding around generative AI, and then we're going to move to prompting and eventually get into that challenge. All right, so before we dive right in, let's just briefly talk about the different types of AI that you may see around you. We have reactive AI, which often responds with these predefined actions. I like to think of a chess program like IBM's Deep Blue that makes moves based on specific rules. Then we have predictive AI, which a lot of us have in our lives all around us, which analyzes data from predicted outcomes, like recommendation systems you might see on Netflix or Spotify or any other kind of streaming platform you might use. And then finally, there's generative AI, which really stands out because it doesn't just react or predict. It creates brand new content based on patterns it has learned. And it's really this creative power of generative AI that we'll be exploring in more detail in tonight's session. Now, in previous sessions, I've compared generative AI to this sort of digital chef that has access to all these different recipes and can kind of whip up a new idea with some creativity given the right prompt. But I'm actually going to use just a bit of a different analogy or metaphor tonight. I also like to think about flying a plane as the pilot. You're in charge. You set the course, you make adjustments, you ensure a smooth flight, but you're not alone, right? You have a co-pilot. The co-pilot doesn't fly the plane for you, but they do provide key insights. They monitor conditions. They suggest helpful actions to make your job easier and more effective. And this is how we can think about generative AI in education as kind of a framing. It's not an autopilot, right, that replaces our judgment or expertise. It can be a co-pilot that assists, refines, and supports our decisions. So whether you're designing rubrics, providing feedback, or even differentiating instruction, AI, generative AI, can really help us do our job more efficiently and effectively without taking over. You're always in the pilot seat. AI just gives us better tools to navigate. So With that being said, there are a number of different use cases, of course, with generative AI. We're going to look at rubrics, so very specifically here tonight. But you're seeing generative AI used in generating lesson plans, creative writing prompts to engage students, personalized feedback on assignments as well, and also some of those supplementary educational materials. So that is just a very brief list of a more comprehensive use case that we're seeing across the educational landscape. But as we enter into this and use AI, it is important just to briefly note before we move into our prompting piece, just some of those risks and responsibilities that are associated with AI in education as well. Deborah, you mentioned that you're using it, ethically as well and helping teach students to do that. And there are those risks and responsibilities on both ends that we need to be concerned about. And especially for us as educators, as we dip into the pool of AI and start using it and trying things out. It is important, of course, to remember that data privacy and security is really important. We want to make sure also that we think about the potential bias in AI outcomes that can be there as well. So want to make sure as we kind of move forward in our work that we use it responsibly as well. We definitely want to protect student information. We want to obey privacy rules. We want to safeguard student data, and we really only want them to collect essential details for teaching purposes. And of course, as we get output for AI, we also want to make sure to evaluate it, to look at it. Is there fairness? Is there accuracy? Is it challenging stereotypes? Is it ensuring diverse perspectives that are represented in learning materials as well? So lots that goes on with using it responsibly and ethically, but I think those are two good starting places for us as we enter into using generative AI on more of a routine basis. Now, I'm going to ask you one more quick time to pop in the chat if you'd like. I love reading the interactions and everything that's going on over there. So really quick, just going to stop again. You told me about your experience, whether you're new or experienced. Um, for those of you who have been tinkering around, what AI tools do you use? Whether it's in your classroom or for your own work, even outside of the classroom. And if you haven't, it'd be nice to understand what type of AI generated content would you find most useful. So I'm going to pause for about 30, 45 seconds, just see if there's any quick responses you want to drop in the chat. And then we are going to move on to prompting and very soon start applying some of those prompts toward rubric use and design. All right, I am going to move forward. Thanks, Deborah. That was really good to hear as well. See a few others starting to scroll in. Maureen, thank you as well. Yes, Deborah, I would imagine that they kind of feel almost liberated to know that it's actually being used in a real kind of helpful way, whether it's brainstorming those ideas or also just providing sort of ease of use with workflows and streamlining things. Love that. Thank you so much. Very good. Thank you all. I am going to move forward and again continue to let that chat roll. It's just again a nice little interactive back channel as we learn together here. But as we're learning, let's go ahead and move forward into our introduction to prompt engineering. Again, a lot of you, rating yourselves fairly high. I'll keep this a little bit brief, but Sid, I know you're coming in new, so I want to make sure that I provide a little bit on this as well before we move forward. So, really quick, when we think about crafting AI prompts, we're really getting into this world of prompt engineering. It's a skill that grows over time. I tend to believe that one day prompt engineering might be its own literacy skill or standard. And so it's kind of exciting to think about where that could go. I think a really good prompt is like a work of art. I just think there's beauty in language and how you precisely get exactly what you're looking for. So for some reason, I just love, and am fascinated by the prompt engineering world underneath that AI umbrella. So to harness the full potential of generative AI, it is important to understand prompt engineering, and it involves the crafting of specific inputs, or what we call prompts, that guide the AI to generate the content you need. And as we might understand, the quality of AI's output is directly tied to the quality of our prompt. A well-crafted prompt could make the difference between something that feels a little bit of a generic response and something that feels kind of truly valuable and tailored as well. Oh, Sid, thank you, thank you. Oh, got you. Very good. Nice to know. Yeah, context always is helpful, so I appreciate that clarification. So with that, I will move forward just with two prompt patterns, approaches, frameworks, if you will, that you might consider using in our prompt challenge coming up very, very soon. One that I love to use is the role task format approach. When I structure my prompts around these three components, I'm really trying to ensure that AI has the guidance it needs to produce focused, relevant, and just properly formatted output. So this is the one that I end up using the most in my interactions. Here's a very quick example using the role task format approach. So in this one, you see the role, the persona is applied to the AI, a physical education instructor. You see the task to create that 15-minute warm up that builds teamwork and needs little equipment and can be applied for different skill levels. And of course, we want to make sure at times that we provide a template or a format for AI to generate its output as well. It's pretty intuitive, right? It'll assume formats that'll be helpful, but sometimes you might actually want to give some precision prompts around it as well. So the role task format approach is one pattern that you might use. Here's another framework that I like as well. I love a good acronym, so the guide works for me as well. With the guide framework, we're looking at five different components to weave into our prompts. We want to make sure that we have a clearly defined goal or outcome. We want to make sure we provide clarity and context as well. That background information helps AI better understand and predict a good output for you. We obviously want to give it clear, specific instructions. What do we want it to do, right? So what is that task going to be? What's the instruct part? And of course, D&E, details and evaluate, making sure with that task that we're giving it that we provide the just right details that we need to get that non-generic response and really get something that's crafted toward us. And as always, at the end, you can also provide a plan for evaluation on that output as well. So very quickly, here's just an example. Feel free to read that on your own for a moment. But I decided to provide a prompt here that kind of breaks down each of those five components into one prompt. So I will pause and just let you read that for a moment, and then we are going to move forward together as a group. All right. And the guide framework will come up a little bit later. I have in that prompt challenge four different prompts that you might decide to use for the interactive piece. And one of them very strictly aligns to the guide framework. So you'll see this a little bit later, as well as that RTF framework as well. But as we wrap up this short little piece on prompting, just want to remind you of a few quick points. Number one, our prompting skills help us navigate the flood of new AI tools in today's market. I know from my perspective, I feel like there's a new tool that comes about every day, and I want to try them all, but at the same time, I don't want 30 different logins and passwords that I need to remember. And I have found that through prompting, have been able to do a lot of what I want to do through large language models like ChatGPT, Copilot, things like that. And so I just believe strongly that having those strong prompting skills allows us, no matter what sort of platform comes our way, to navigate it effectively and really well. Also, of course, remember as we're going through this prompting piece, don't stop at one prompt. That's that fourth point down below. That's one I want to highlight as well. Iterate with your prompts, refining each one until AI delivers the outcome that you need. And finally, of course, always review that AI generated content to ensure that accuracy, alignment with your standards, and appropriateness for your students. Kind of back to those risk and responsibilities piece. We want to make sure that we are always reviewing the output before we put it into use. Now, with that, I want to start digging in a little bit deeper, and I want to talk a little bit about this intersection of generative AI and rubric design and use. So, I want to give us a little bit to chew on with rubrics, and then I want to give you some very specific prompts that you can try out on your end during our interactive piece that's coming up very soon. All right. So, rubrics serve as a roadmap for students that really guide them towards success and really ensure fairness in assessment as well. So before an assessment begins, rubrics can clarify expectations. They can remove that guesswork from students. We don't want success to be a mystery. They also help us maintain consistency when grading, ensuring that each student's work is evaluated against the same criteria. And finally, well structured rubrics aren't just about scoring. They promote growth by giving students clear feedback on strengths and areas of improvement as well. So that's a little bit about the when, the why, and the how of things with rubrics. But I also want to talk about a few other items as well. So I love these words from a colleague and friend of mine, Andrew Miller, who wrote a blog a few years ago, and he talked about this idea of rubrics being a beast, right? When it comes to designing rubrics or using them, there can be a variety of challenges. Maybe it's making sure that they're clear and specific, or perhaps ensuring they are fair and aligned to learning goals. Some of us might even struggle with keeping rubrics manageable and are not overly complex for students. Whatever your challenge is, I want you to consider how AI might help with that. This might even set the stage for what you might address in our upcoming prompt challenge as well. And by the way, the blog that I'm referencing and quoting right here will also be in the slide deck for you, which will be shared after our session as well. But I think he brings up a good point. I know the rubrics have been a beast for me at times. I know that one of my biggest pet peeves was I would use rubrics and hand them out to students and read them out to them line by excruciating line, and then the bell would ring and students would go to their next period, and all the rubrics would still be sitting on the tables and on their desk, and there was really no ownership or usage of them in a meaningful way. And so I know when I first started using rubrics, I had a lot of frustrations. But I hope tonight a couple of these AI prompts will help alleviate some of those thorny points with rubric use. Now, I want to talk about just a few other items with rubrics as well. I always think it's nice to kind of draw out insights from effective rubrics. So I want to do that as well. Because rubrics aren't just about grading, they're a powerful tool for learning. And research tells us when we have clear rubrics, when students do, they feel more confident and prepared for assessments. When rubrics incorporate real-world applications, students are more engaged and motivated. And when schools consistently use well-designed rubrics, student achievement can improve. So today we're going to explore how AI can actually streamline that rubric creation piece. And Deborah, I'm looking at your question right now. Is it helpful to give students explanation for all levels of the rubric, or should we just describe exceptional work for them? Very, very good. Good question. So I'm gonna throw a few things your way here, and we'll see if this kind of draws some satisfactory answers for you. And of course, those of you who are in the chat as well, you might actually respond to Deborah. But Deborah, you kind of led me to a couple things that I'm going to be sharing in these next few slides, and I hope they at least address a few of these questions as we move forward. Um, First off, I want to just talk about some of the types of rubrics. There are a number of different types of rubrics that you can use. And I've got, oh, yes. And like Deborah said, I've gone back and forth as well on the detail of my rubrics. And in fact, I'll kind of just share three areas of different rubrics I've used. And I'll tell you the one that I've landed on. And I hope it's helpful as well. The first one is the holistic rubric. Holistic rubrics provide a kind of a single score based on an overall impression of student performance rather than breaking it down into specific criteria like you were mentioning, Deborah. They're used when efficiency is a priority and detailed feedback isn't necessarily the highest priority. Some of the common uses that you might see in Canada and the States, you may see this in standardized testing, where we have the SAT or maybe the secondary school literacy test. But these are kind of sometimes used in these large scale assessments, especially in writing assessments. You might see them in quick assessments as well, such as evaluating a short presentation or maybe even a discussion participation with students. So this is one approach. The one that we see most often is the analytic rubric. The analytic rubric. This is really about breaking down performance into those multiple criteria scored separately, as you were mentioning, Deborah. These are really the most commonly used rubrics in really the US and Canada because they provide such detailed feedback. You see this in writing assignments as well. You see this in STEM subjects. You'll see this in project-based learning and inquiry-based learning units and performance-based assessments as well, kind of breaking down at each level what quality looks like with students. Now, I have no um, negative feelings necessarily about the analytic and the holistic rubric, but they just haven't been the most effective rubric, at least for my students that I served. So I want to disclose that bias on the next slide because the next one really highlights the one that I gravitate toward the most. And again, that's just one person's opinion and experience. And so take that as you will. But I really enjoy the single point rubric. Single point rubrics provide a clear expectation for proficiency, but then allow for customized feedback on strengths and areas of improvement. These are really gaining a lot of popularity in classrooms that emphasize that growth mindset through formative assessment. And it makes the rubric a little bit more of a useful tool in the fact that it's used formatively and not just for the grade at the end. Oftentimes, and you see the screenshot over there on the left-hand part of the slide, what you usually have in this rubric is the meets expectation piece. But on the far left, single point rubric advocates will say things like, we use a lot of that criteria on the left-hand side of the rubric with deficit-based language like did not, would not, could not. Instead of having that deficit-based language, let's remove that and leave that open to provide substantive practical feedback that can help students with areas for improvement. So we don't set the basement. But on the other end of the spectrum, we also don't set the ceiling. Single point rubric advocates will say things like, "Hey, we want to make sure that if students go beyond the expectation, we can name that over on the right-hand column as well." By the way, I have some supplemental resources that will be in the slide deck that I share with you as well. One of them is from one of my favorite blogs called Cult of Pedagogy. Jennifer Gonzalez, if you've heard of her, writes about all sorts of topics, but I think she has some really useful points about single point rubrics. And also have one from Edutopia, and it will kind of outline 6 reasons to try a single point rubric as well. So, with that being said, just know that any one of these 3 types of rubrics might be used in some of your prompt challenges coming up as well. But I have found, at least from my student feedback, that it feels cleaner, more easier to understand, and it actually is a living, breathing document when I use single point rubrics. So my feedback is I like them, but the main reason is my students like them, and they seem to be more clear on what success looked, sound, and felt like with any assignment. Now, for students, rubrics are something they often see at the start of an assignment and then again at the end when they receive a grade. And AI can help change that by transforming rubrics into interactive tools that guide students through the learning process. In fact, by using AI, teachers can convert rubrics into self-assessment checklists that students can use, allows them to kind of monitor their own progress against that established criteria. AI can also just simplify rubric language, making it more accessible for younger students and those who need those clear expectations as well. Also, a well-designed rubric should provide all students with an equal opportunity to succeed, but sometimes unintentional bias can creep in as well. So AI can also assist in reviewing rubric language for those subtle biases that may favor certain student backgrounds or prior knowledge. For example, if a rubric descriptor assumes strong written proficiency without allowing alternative ways to demonstrate understanding, AI could flag this and suggest more inclusive wording. Additionally, it could assess whether performance descriptors rely on subjective language, which can also lead to inconsistent grading. So, even running a rubric through AI can provide a chance to identify and correct these issues before students even encounter them. And of course, that just ensures that every learner has a fair and equitable experience. Again, this doesn't mean that AI replaces that critical human judgment, but it does simply add another layer of review that really helps teachers create assessments and rubrics that work for all students. Now we're getting close to moving into the prompt challenge because I do want to give you some time just to tinker. But I will say this, and again, you will see the links on the slide deck that I share with you after our session. Again, be looking out for that email in a couple of days. But there's 3 rubric generator tools out in the market that I've at least tried and given them a whirl. Magic School, Teacher Dashboard AI, and also Teachermatic. And again, I'll give you links to those if you feel compelled to use them. But again, I will say, just disclosing my love for good prompt engineering, I've been able to make much better rubrics, more personalized and nuanced rubrics through large language models like ChatGPT and just some good old-fashioned prompting. So while these tools may offer drag and drop features and maybe accelerate some of those pieces, I sometimes like taking the long way. And so I want you to think about what your preference is as well. But if you want to try out some tools, I definitely have a few that you might engage in when I share that slide deck. So those are 3 just to consider. Now, really quick, before we move forward, I want to talk just a moment about the use of rubrics. But here's just another chance to drop into the chat, share with one another. I'm going to continue moving forward, but I'd love for you just to share with one another in the chat. In what ways do you use rubrics with students? And are there any specific strategies that stand out for you with that use? So feel free to drop those in whenever you feel ready. Again, what ways do you use rubrics or would like to use rubrics with students? And again, any specific strategies that stand out. I'll share a few while you're dropping yours into the chat. We'll just collectively just share our knowledge together. One thing, this is a quote from my grandfather. He and my late grandfather used to say this a lot, and oftentimes he was talking about my brain. But he used to always say, "Things are only useful if you use them." And I feel like that's a very strong relationship to rubrics. So how do I use them? There's at least three ways that have worked for me. Showing high, middle, and low quality examples alongside the rubric really helps students understand what those performance expectations look, sound, and feel like. And so sometimes the words themselves on the page of the rubric don't necessarily give students that clear picture. So when I have the opportunity, if I have anonymous previous student work, I love to use those models, high, medium, and low, to calibrate around quality. I'm also like to walk students through the rubric, just discussing expectations, providing examples to ensure clarity, even rewording things to make sure that it's in student-friendly language. And also, I just like to integrate the rubric into the learning journey, using it as a formative assessment tool for feedback and revisions instead of just for that final grading piece. This is another tell myself moment. Oftentimes, when I started off using rubrics, I would show it at the beginning of a unit, and then like a hand from the grave, it would come back up and it'd be around for the very final piece of grading. And I never really used it in that formative way until I moved over into those single point rubrics. And so, again, I've just found it to be a highly useful tool when we use them, when we use them. Now, with all that being said, I do want to give us a chance to just engage in some prompting that will help us generate and use rubrics in practical and efficient ways. And so, what I want to do is just quickly set you up for the challenge. And I want you to kind of take whichever prompt you want to use. And I'm going to give you some time to tinker on your own with an LLM, a large language model, whether it be, again, ChatGPT, Google's Gemini, whether it's Copilot from Microsoft, whatever works for you. I am going to encourage you to have that open and ready. And I've got four different prompts, and you'll try one tonight, but you're going to have access to all these prompts after you leave tonight, just in case you want to use them in your own practice or share them with others who might benefit as well. So first off, this is a structured prompt some of you might use that follows that guide framework that we mentioned earlier. And it's really designed to help educators create a rubric that is both effective and student friendly. Instead of just saying in this prompt, make a rubric, this prompt is guiding AI to ensure the rubric aligns with learning objectives, that it's accessible to students, and even includes a checklist, a student-facing checklist that they can use for self-assessment. So as you see right here, I've got a prompt that you might use in just a moment. By the way, I'm going to share a slide deck that has just these four prompts in just a moment, so you can easily copy and paste these over into your AI platform to accelerate this piece as well. Second option. Now, this one takes a little bit of a different approach. It invites AI to engage in a back and forth conversation rather than just generating a rubric immediately. By structuring the request this way, the AI can really focus on questions to clarify details before producing the final rubric, really to make it more aligned with your specific needs. So this is the flipped interaction approach. If you want AI to kind of take the lead, so to speak, in the interaction, you might try this one out. I'm always a fan of doing the flipped interaction just because it's kind of just offers a novel way of interacting. So that's another way that you might use it. Option three, this prompt is designed for educators who, already have a rubric, right? But they want expert level feedback to refine it. So Instead of just asking AI to review it in general terms, the prompt that you see here is asking it to break down the review into three focused areas: like clarity, alignment, usability. Really ensuring that the feedback is both structured and actionable. And it also sets clear expectations for how AI should respond by requiring strengths, areas of improvement, and a revised version of the rubric. So this is one, if you already have a rubric and you would like to upload that rubric, share that rubric with your large language model and get some feedback on it. So that one's kind of a unique approach. And finally, your fourth option that you might consider, this prompt really goes beyond just creating a rubric. It focuses on how to make rubrics a powerful learning tool rather than just an assessment tool. It pushes generative AI to generate high impact strategies that help students engage with rubrics at the start of a task, but also throughout their learning process. So the key strength of this prompt is that it doesn't just, ask for those generic strategies. It demands explanations, behind what's the why behind this strategy and practical tips for implementation. So the first two, right? The first two are really about creating a rubric, right? Either way would do. You can guide it or you can have this flipped interaction piece. That third one is really more about if you walked in tonight and you have a rubric or an easily accessible one and you would like to try this one out. And finally, the fourth prompt is about how do we use this in meaningful, creative ways beyond just the typical ideas that we might already have? What are some unique things that AI can give us as far as ideas to use rubrics in meaningful ways? So all those are at your disposal. Let me drop into the chat the slide deck for the prompt challenge. In just a moment, I'm going to put myself on mute because I just want to give you some time to tinker around, try things out, and see which prompts might work for you best. Again, I'm going to ask you to try one for tonight, but knowing that you'll have all of these four prompts after tonight as well. So we're going to give you a little bit of time to do so. Love to give you just about 10 minutes or so just to try out some of these prompts. And after that, we're going to come back for a final reflection. And I would love to know, like, what happened? What prompt did you try? Did you adjust it? What iterations and follow-up prompts did you use? We'll do that final reflection at the end. But for now, I'm going to mute myself, jump into that slide deck, copy and paste, and customize it to your context. And again, uh, continue to iterate, right? That's the first prompt, but you might have follow-ups after that initial one as well. Okay, everyone, I am going to jump in and interrupt your prompting because I would like to wrap things up because the time is coming. So, with that being said, let's wrap things up with a final closing reflection. You had some time to maybe copy and paste and adjust and customize one of those prompts. Just curious. What you might share at the end here. What prom challenge did you try? How well did the output match your expectations? Did you provide any follow-up prompts? And just in general, if there's a takeaway from tonight's webinar experience, love to hear that as well. It's really wide open in here, but as we wrap up, I always love to bring up the words of John Dewey. We don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on that experience. And so, as we wrap up, feel free to drop any final reflections in the chat. And in about a few minutes, we're going to make things official and wrap up the webinar. Oh, very good. Very good to read here. Thank you so much. I'm going to leave this open for just another moment or so. Nice to see what you did on your end. Thank you. All right, everybody. So this wraps up our third and final installment of the webinar series on generative AI and assessment. As I mentioned before, you will be receiving an email. It will be in a couple of days. The sooner the video is produced and ready, and the better, the quicker I'll send it out. But do be on the lookout for an email from me both sharing the webinar video in YouTube form, but I'll also will be sharing the full slide deck that you saw tonight as well. Hope you found it helpful, and I hope maybe it could be shared with someone else around you that could help them as well. So thanks for coming. I know we all have a lot of things we could be doing rather than being here tonight, and so I'm always thankful and just appreciative of everyone's attendance and keeping the chat active and really just kind of digging in to what AI can do for us as educators. So thanks again, and hope to see you next time. And I appreciate you again giving this a go tonight. But everyone have a great night and be well for the rest of the week. Thank you, Sid. I will definitely do that. I'm going to screenshot your request right now just to make sure it gets to its right place. And if no one else has any other comments to drop in the chat, I'm going to bid you all a good night. And again, thanks for coming and look out for that email coming very soon. Good night, everyone.